On this episode of the Fallible Man podcast, discover how to build meaningful connections in your life and family, overcome loneliness and find genuine companionship, embrace vulnerability as a strength, and cultivate a supportive tribe that lifts you up. Join us for an enlightening discussion with men's coach and podcaster Jason Lange. Here's the $1,000,000 question: how do men like us reach our full potential, growing to the men we dream of becoming while taking care of our responsibilities, working, living, being good husbands, fathers, and still take care of ourselves? Well, that's the big question. And in this podcast, we'll help you with those answers and more. My name is Brent, and welcome to the Fallible Man Podcast. Welcome to the Fallible Man Podcast, your home for all things man, husband, and father. Big shout out to Fallible Nation. That's our private community. There's more information about that if you're interested down in the show notes or description, wherever you're watching the show. And a warm welcome to our first time listeners. Hey, thanks for checking us out. We know that there is a lot fighting for your attention these days. So it means a lot to us that you're taking the time to check out the show. Please be sure and connect with me at The Fallible Man on most social medias and let me know what you thought of the show. I'd love to hear your opinion of it. If you really enjoyed it, be sure and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and come back around. We do this twice a week. Today, my special guest is men's coach and podcaster Jason Lange. Jason, welcome to the Fallible Man Podcast.
So excited to be here.
Jason, it's going to be a good conversation, but we like to start out on the lighter note. So how is your trivia skills?
Depends on the topic, but I got a few arrows in the quiver.
Okay. Well, I looked these up, so it's hit or miss whether I get one that's in the right area for you. What is Bruno Mars's real name? Is it A, Peter Gene Hernandez, B, Michael Eugene Stevenson, C, Ray Aguilar, or D, Bruno Matsuriet? I can't even say that. That one.
I'd go with the last one, but I have no idea.
Okay. Guys, you know how the game works. Don't cheat. Don't skip ahead. Don't look it up. And for God's sake, don't write it down. If you're listening to this in the car, just remember what it is and come back later and we'll deal with that oh so groundbreaking, earth-shattering question that we're all concerned about. Jason, I don't do big introductions. So in your own words today, who is Jason Lange?
Yeah, I'm a father, first and foremost. I'm a husband, and I'm a man who loves to help other men. And so a lot of that's born out of my own journey as a, human being on this planet who's been trying to figure out, hey, how can I do this life in a way that is full of love, full of impact, and in trying to figure that out for myself, I've kind of fallen into helping other men do that. So I just love supporting other guys. Um, I'm also a big nerd in the sense I love movies and film and music, and invest, a lot of my time into just enjoying and exploring that world as well. So lots of things I'm passionate about, but particularly probably movies and men are probably the biggest two.
Okay, so we're a movie. See, I always got to clarify with that. When someone's like, I'm a nerd, you got to clarify, right? Because I'm a huge movie nerd.
Yeah,
You
great.
and I totally like sync up on that. But then you get like, I had one guy I asked a question, and it was a D&D question. He's like, why couldn't it be like space nerd, like aliens and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
sure,
And I do
totally.
D&D, right? I don't do fantasy. I do like space nerd. I'm like, it's so complicated.
It
So
is a vast world. That's true of nerddom these days. In a lot of ways, I think we've won the culture.
right? Everybody is a nerd in some place, whether they want to admit it
Yeah.
or not. They got that one or two things that they're just like, you get them there and they completely nerd out. I had one guest, we swapped recipes, Italian recipes, for like 20 minutes.
Ha ha! That's
And I
awesome.
cut an entire like 20-minute portion of the show out because we nerded out together swapping Italian recipes, right? So yeah, you find that right spot for people. So what's your favorite movie? Gotta ask.
Oh, I have so many, man. I could list this for eons and eons and eons. So
Go
again, it kind of depends on the genre, but deep cut here. So this is a film nerd one for sure. But I love My Uncle by Jacques Tati, which is a like from the 50s, just an unbelievable French movie. I don't know if you've ever seen any of them, but
No.
it's about this character, and they're essentially silent movies made
Mm.
well past the silent era, but they are the most visually stimulating films one could imagine, and they're hilarious. They're just hilarious. So highly recommend checking out any of his films. Those are ones that I would just go to anytime. Like kids find them funny, older people find them funny. They're just immensely entertaining in a way that movies aren't really made like that anymore.
See, I love those little hidden gems in there. Have you seen Sunset Limited?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? Most people have never heard of that film. Oh my goodness. Talk about like it wasn't like a huge visual, like the whole thing is a conversation between two
Yeah.
men. It's a brilliant movie.
I
A little
love
heavy
yeah.
on the subject matter, but I would also watch those two actors discuss like recipes for gravy or something.
That's when you know they got the chemistry, right? When you're
Right?
just like,
The
I'll just sit
talent.
here watch you talk.
So, how many kids you got?
Just one. Yeah, I
Just
got one
one?
4-year-old.
Yeah. All right. The four is a fun age. I've got a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're in a different, getting into a different phase.
Yeah, I'm getting into I'm feeling old age. My my 12-year-old is starting to do stuff with the youth group at church, and my 9-year-old went to her first sleepover this last weekend, and
Oh wow.
my stress levels went through the roof. I've got it's like, no, she's never been away from home without us, one of us with her, and it's like, the whole night I'm on edge just waiting for my phone to ring to go get her.
Mhm.
I'm a slightly overprotective dad. Just fair enough. Anybody listening, that's just me being honest. I'm definitely a little bit overprotective. What is your best playground insult?
My best playground insult. Let me think. I was never a great I was never really the insulter in some sense. I was always the peacemaker on the playground. Um, it'd probably be some kind of fart joke. I don't know. Nothing too complex here.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Zombie apocalypse. What's your weapon of choice?
I would probably go with something very basic, like a sword or an axe. That's not gonna that that if tended could last a very long time
See,
because
there's
that's not ending anytime soon.
right. There's a lot of logic behind that. I love people who are like, "Oh, I'd get a big gun." It's like, what happens when you run out of ammunition?
Exactly.
Got to think these things through. Coffee, tea, energy drink, soda, or something else entirely.
These days, I'll have tea and I have about one coffee a day.
Yeah.
I did about a year and a half decaf and no caffeine, and just lightly sprinkling my toes back in these days.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I have a background in IT and some other fields, and I live on caffeine.
Mhm.
The funny thing is, like, it doesn't. I don't know if I technically fall into like the ADHD scale because it doesn't hype me up.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I'll drink
totally.
coffee all the way up till I go to bed, and I sleep like a baby.
Yeah, I did um, the genetics thing a number of years ago, and it actually showed that there's a slow caffeine gene where you
Mm.
metabolize caffeine much slower than other people. So I think you and I have the same thing where like I don't get the big jitter, like it's just kind of like, oh, a little more here, all good.
I know clinically ADHD diagnosis, like actual legitimate clinical ADHD, because I used to be a youth minister. Um,
Yeah.
it has the opposite effect. Like I had 2 kids. I would buy
Hmm.
the coffee on some trips. We were
Sure.
in the car for like 5 hours driving to go somewhere as a group. I would pull over and like buy them an espresso. Take this now.
And they
It
would just
will kill you. Yeah, because on an actual legitimate ADHD diagnosis, it will bring them down.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Uh, that's I mean, the biggest, cheapest way to find out if you are ADHD. If you're like all the time and coffee slows you down, consult your physician, because we're not doctors here. But that's the big giveaway after working with teenagers for 20 plus years is like, oh, okay, now I
Wow,
know.
yeah, amazing.
What purchase of $100 or less have you made in the last year that's had the biggest impact on your life?
Just coming out of, kind of the winter illness season, we got one of those handheld vaporizers where you can
Mhm.
just breathe in hot water, essentially. Oh man, to just when you're all congested, just sit back, breathe for like 15 minutes. It is amazing. It has been a game changer for us. We had like an old one, you'd have to like be in the kitchen, standing over, the counter. It was so uncomfortable. And I was just like chilling on TV, kind of, looks like a space mask in a sense, but I huge recommend. My wife and I are just like totally on board.
Really? I'm gonna have to go to the store after this. I'm the guy standing over the boiling pot on the stove.
Yep, totally. Yeah,
I
this
have
one you just
big
hit a little
sinus.
button. You can put some essential oils in there. Just easy deep breathing. So good during this time of year.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna have to
Especially with kids, right? When you have
yeah,
sickness just constantly coming through the house.
I'm a lifetime sinus sufferer. Like, I have really, like, just clinically bad sinus issues all the time. I'm always stuffed up. There is no clear. There's manageable, then there's knock you down, non-functioning
Mhm.
days. Uh, but manageable is I can breathe with about the oxygen flow of about, 20% of a normal person.
Yeah, man, I don't have it that strong, but I do have a pretty deviated septum, so, like, this side is pretty non-functional. But this side,
Mhm.
I can get some airflow. But yeah, man, it's annoying. It slows you down in life.
Not being
Slows
able
me
to breathe.
down.
I had an ear, nose, and throat specialist be like, "Wow, your life has had to suck." I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "The glands in your nose are so oversized that you have like a paper width of airflow on each side of your
Mhm.
nose." She's like, it's had to." I was like, "I was a starter on every team I was ever on." She's like, "Think of how far you could have gone in sports if you could actually breathe like a normal person."
Mm.
Like, I didn't think my life sucked until you said that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
To know I could have performed that much better. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a hindsight I didn't want.
Yeah, it's it for me, it's actually quite impacted my sleep is probably the
Mm,
biggest place. So I'm now on the just get all the things at night to have a good night of sleep where I do the nose thing, I do the
mhm.
mouth tape, and it works though. I gotta say, I'm about 2 months in and I am like waking up full nasal passages, which I'm like fully open. I'm like, wow, this is totally different and not
How's the mouth
not
tape?
not covered in a pool of drool like I usually am.
How's the mouth tape? I've never actually I keep seeing the
Yeah, it's great,
Aussie
man.
tape brand.
Yeah, yeah, I got them.
Mm,
I recommended from another friend actually because they're like, it's one of the only ones strong enough to handle facial hair. But it's great. Yeah, by the time I wake up, I can't even feel it's on anymore, which is kind of interesting because the body's like so used to it.
hmm,
So it just kind of disappears. But yeah, I found my sleep quality has gone way up, and
ooh,
because I used to be a mouth breather and tossing and turning all night, and now
mm,
it's like I wake up in the morning and I'm breathing through my nose, and it's just like, my mouth is nice and humid and, not all dry and gross. So it's been a total win for me.
oh my goodness. Well, I don't know if you guys are getting much out of this, but I am. So I'm buying mouth tape now. Who knew? See, great conversations. That's why I like to talk to people. You learn things when you talk to people. Jason, if I sat down with your family, what is one funny story they'd tell to try and embarrass you?
They would probably tell stories of me, honestly, just like getting so into action figures. I was just the kind of kid that would just play and play and play in my like own little imaginary world. My favorite thing used to be after we'd like mow the lawn, be taking all the grass clippings and like making little forts from my action figures in the corner of the yard. And man, I would just like be out there in my own little universe for hours and hours and hours. And it was fascinating to them. They just called me, yeah, I was in my own little bubble.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. As a dad, I love seeing kids with enough imagination that they can do that.
Totally. Yeah, it is
Is-
fun now seeing my daughter do the same thing.
right? You're just like, yes, because that's a kid who's never going to be truly lonely.
Yeah, yeah,
They
that's so true.
know how to imagine and play by themselves, and I
I
like
love
that.
that.
If you won $10 million tomorrow, what would you spend on?
You know, getting things secure for my family. So just creating a stable base of investment for um, the future of my lineage. Yeah, that would be the first thing. Second thing, I'd probably do one of those like around the world golden tickets where you can just get on any plane or train and finally take the time to, see quite a bit of what I've never seen and bring the family along for that and just explore, man. Explore all the just wild different geographies and cultures that I have some ideas about, but the traveling I have done, it's just always so mind bending for me to actually be there and do it. And man, I would love to take a trip like that if I had unlimited funds.
Be nice. What's one totally random fact that people don't know about you?
I am well. One of the places I'm a nerd is I fucking love. I love sharks. I just, man, I grew up, a Shark Week aficionado, and always the kid checking out the shark books from the library. And I cannot wait, on the travel front one day to do one of the diving expeditions and actually get in the water and just see
Yeah,
these, the big old great whites in particular. I think would just be awe-inspiring to, an animal that's just kind of been doing its thing for as long as we know, just out there. And as they've learned more about them, and now we can approach them in different ways. It's like they're basically just super chill almost 98% of the time. They
mhm,
think you're a seal. Yeah, you might be in some trouble, but otherwise you can just kind of hang out with them, which is like so different than, when I was raised. It was always putting blood in the water and they'd get into a frenzy and,
right.
jaws, and people just had these demonic thoughts about them, but they're actually, just relatively chill fish, sharks.
You do Instagram?
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
You checked out Ocean Ramsey?
Oh yeah, man. That's just man, that footage, right? Every time I'm like, stunning.
My future sister-in-law has dove with her. She's a Hawaii girl, and she's gotten to dive with her, and she loves diving with sharks and stuff. I'm like, no, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah. I'm sure I'd be quivering the moment I do it, but man,
I've been around large land mammals, but man, and I love the water. But you get me, like, I like being the top of the food chain, or at least
yeah,
having the
sure.
illusion that I'm the top of the food chain. In their world, I'm not, and I know that. It's that self-realization of it's like, yes, there are things scarier. Got it.
Yeah, it's so
I
true.
don't I don't think sharks are evil. I just know it's like once I'm in their element,
Totally.
we are now not on level ground as far
There's a
as that, right?
yeah, definitely a power differential once we get in the water. That's for sure.
That's very cool. Sharks, huh?
Yeah, I love them, man.
What's one thing everybody should know about you before we dig in today?
Um, everything should know about me. Man, I just care. I'm just a man who cares about other people, about the planet, about culture, about love. I care. And I've oriented a considerable amount of my life around caring.
Okay, it's fair. Guys, we've been getting to know Jason just a little bit, seeing who he is, what he's about, what he's like. Well, in this part of the show, we're going to talk about Jason's company, what he does, his podcast, and we're going to start diving into the myth of the lone wolf versus the pack. Now, Jason, tell us a little bit about Evolutionary Man and what you're doing there as far as coaching and how you got there. I mean, was
Yeah.
that always what you've done, or
No, it's definitely been a journey for me. And my life, my work's taken many, career moves and whatnot. I was a filmmaker for a long time, did a lot of media production. But it really all started, the journey here started in my 20s and actually even earlier in that. I, was raised in a pretty great family, but didn't really have any emotional connection in it. Like, so all my needs were kind of, met in terms of just place to live, food to eat. Parents did what they could, but there was no interiority to our family and our ability to connect with each other. So I grew up pretty lonely and grew up not really knowing how to connect in a lot of ways and not feeling very comfortable in my body. And particularly as I became a teenager and became interested in dating, that really started to become apparent in my life. And I just didn't know how to do it. And so I spent all my teenage years and pretty much most of my 20s alone and single. And the only, not the only, but one of the positive things in there is I always just happen to have a pretty solid small group of men around me, male friends who, particularly in the earlier years where it was around video games and nerd stuff. Then as I got into my 20s and, was really finding like, wow, I don't feel good in my body most of the time. Like I just don't feel good. I don't feel happy. I often feel anxious and stressed and uncomfortable. I kind of stepped onto the path of inner work and growth and did many, many, many things. But the one that was probably the biggest profound shift for me was in my mid 20s. I got into my first men's group, right? So I got connected to a bunch of other guys who were just wanting to grow as men, as humans, and that really set a trajectory for me in a lot of ways. Had me take some bold moves in my career and take some risks. Really got me evolved, so to speak, in my inner world and my capacity to connect to others and how I felt about myself. And I just stayed on that train, even as I moved around the country. I formed a new men's group when I moved and was just so deep into it and was naturally often talking to people about it of like, hey, here's something I'm doing. It's been really useful for me. And then guys in particular would start to ask me like, oh, hey, can I join? Like, do you have any space in your group? And I'd be like, in my group at the time was, a closed group. So it was just 8 of us. And where we met, we literally didn't have space for anyone else. So I'd be like, no. But, I'd highly suggest checking something out. And after a while, enough guys asked me that I was like, maybe I should do something for some of these men. And so I just started leading groups on 2 Mondays a night in my uh, living room of my house. And things really just kind of grew from there in that I started doing that more and more. I started getting more energy for it and I started getting, financial reward back. And I was like, well, I love doing this. It seems to be something I'm good at. There's a huge need and why don't I give it a go? So I pivoted to, becoming a men's group coach um, back in like 2018, and I've been doing it ever since. And I love it. I do them online, I do them in person, and I'm just really part of my mission is, every guy should be in a man's group, and I feel like the world would be a much, much better place, and a lot of us men would be a lot happier and just thriving more in general if that was the case.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, the Evolutionary Man podcast, that right?
Yeah, it's called Evolutionary Men, and it's me kind of just sharing most of the time about the different things I've discovered in my journey that help men, in particular, lead in their lives and including their love lives. Of like, what does it take to be a grounded, present, impactful man in the modern day? One of the challenges a lot of men I work with, and certainly was true for me, struggle with is there's so much talk these days around the toxic masculine and the dangers men bring to the world, but there's not a whole lot of talk about like, well, what's the positive, right? What's the healthy version of the masculine or men? And what are our role models for many, many of us men? As I often say, uh, if we're lucky, we maybe got it exposed to 3 of the kind of primary archetypes of men. One of which is, I kind of call the old school macho jerk. It's just a guy who's like goes out there and does what he wants, takes what he wants, um, tends to be pretty focused on himself, and doesn't necessarily care a lot about the people around him. And oftentimes those men can acquire a lot of power and succeed and achieve in different areas of life, but at great cost sometimes to relationships, the environment, culture, etc. Then in kind of the response to that, a lot of men grew up seeing volatile men or abusive men or men who abuse their power, whatever that might be. There was the emergence of what we call the nice guy, which was kind of coined by my friend Dr. Robert Glover in his book, The More Mr. Nice Guy, which is kind of the opposite of that. So it's the man who's totally present in his heart, is very sensitive, very safe, really cares about taking care of people around him. But often um, the cost of that is he disconnects from himself, his own power, his own wants, his own needs, often struggles to set boundaries in many different ways, and is often left feeling frustrated in life, not getting the types of relationships he wants or not getting the type of work he wants. And that one doesn't really work. And then there's also what I kind of call the stoic, right? Sometimes we get from our grandfathers or just other different men who are the kind of men that just show up, do their work, are technically there in their lives and communities, but have battened down the hatches in terms of their inner world, right? They never show any weakness, never show any emotion, tend to be kind of pretty isolated. And that one doesn't work either, right? All three of these end up causing a lot of pain for men. So like what's beyond that is kind of what my podcast is about, is how do we become men that are rooted, grounded in our power, open and sensitive and deeply aware to what's most important in our relationships and our culture and our family, to be able to, give our gifts and create safety and lead in the world.
And guys, that's evolutionary men, right? I made that mistake looking for it earlier. If you type in evolutionary man, you don't find his show. It's evolutionary men. I
Yeah, no, totally.
was
And
researching for the show and I'm like, why isn't this coming up? I know that's oh men, man. I interchange men and man, I think probably a little too frequently when I type things. So
yeah, no worries.
it's with an E, it's men, not man. So if you're looking for his show, use the E because you'll not find it otherwise. My own little idiosyncrasies. I'm so used to typing the fallible man, like I
Yep,
automatically hit the A. Muscle memory on the keyboard, right? Little
totally.
thing. Now it's interesting because we see this. I think we're starting to see some changes in this, but all of us are familiar with the lone wolf concept, right? Guys rah-rahing the lone wolf, and that's where we get, I think, as you call it, the stoic aspect, right? Is a lot of where that's rooted in. I am my own world. I just need me. Do it
Yeah.
yourself. And this has not actually been a very functional thing for men. So let's talk about being the lone wolf for a minute.
Yeah, it comes at us from, many angles. For one, um, just the expectations and kind of cultural beliefs of what a man is supposed to be. That's one area we get it. Men are supposed to be tough. We're not supposed to be weak. We're supposed to work hard. Um, we start to kind of absorb these messages, and then depending on what kind of culture you were raised in, locker room talk for a lot of kids when they're young can be pretty brutal, right? On the playground or um, in small groups or whatever that might be. If you're a man and a boy in particular and you show some kind of vulnerability or emotion, it's pretty easy to get torn down for it, right? And be taught, okay, we're not supposed to do that, so I can't show any weakness around my friends. Otherwise, they're going to, cut me down or bully me or whatever that might be. And so I got to keep that all inside. It starts to form there. And then, particularly, I'm here in the States, and there's a deep thread of this woven in to, America, our culture, the rugged cowboy, the rugged individualist, right? The frontiersman who just survives and picks himself up by the bootstraps and doesn't need anybody. is kind of the expectation of like what a solid, powerful man is. And like you said, the truth is, it almost never works that way, right? Those men are often on the inside are actually quite suffering. Um, for many, many men for many, many years, the medicine of choice was alcohol, right? So, yeah, I can be tough. And what does alcohol do? It numbs you out even more. And so I can keep pushing my body or disconnecting from people. And in general, it just creates this whole paradigm of, yeah, we're supposed to be the lone wolf and men are competition. And it doesn't work. And I see and work with so many men who are suffering because of this, and it's just intensified in the last years, through the pandemic, through changes in kind of society and culture and the way people connect and the move to work from home. Men and men are becoming more and more isolated, in particular, way more than even women. And this I'm going to do it all by myself, it creates so much pressure and so much strife for men in particular. And this idea that the lone wolf is the model is so flawed, right? Because even in the actual nature we steal that term for, the lone wolf is the one that was actually kicked out of the pack, and they never live as long. They die the fastest, right? Once they're no longer part of the pack, it's not because they're the best or they're thriving, it's because they've been ejected, right? And their life expectancy goes way down. And the same is true for us as human beings. I mean, the stats are crazy in terms of how loneliness can impact us. Um, just as dangerous as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, being severely obese. Like, it has an actual impact on our lifespan, how long we're going to live in the world. This stuff really can take men down. And the crisis just keeps getting more and more extreme in so many ways. And so, yeah, a big part of what I'm here to do is, bust that myth that the lone wolf is not where you want to be. You want to be part of a community. And it's those guys, particularly, men in community with other men, what I say, uh, that become the most resilient and able to tackle the stresses and challenges of life, um, with energy and with vitality and with a lot more connection.
Is there anything, let me uh, ask this carefully. Is there anything positive to take out of that concept?
Sure. I would say a certain amount of resourcefulness and being able to, you know, have agency and drive and motivation in your own life is important. Not to be totally uh, dependent on others. You do need a certain level of self actualization, I would say. But the thing I found is, a lot of men, we set these like lofty goals for ourselves in terms of our careers or health or finances or relationships. And then we don't resource ourselves to actually accomplish them. And then these things become ways we beat ourselves up subtly inside. Oh, I didn't do that thing, or I failed that thing. And that gets really hard on us. Whereas, again, the power of a good group or a good community, it doesn't stop us from moving towards the things we want, but it's another container to hold us accountable and support us to moving towards what we want. So ideally, you have that self drive, but then you have a collective, a community to support you through when things don't go right, or when you need a little hand holding, or when you feel stuck. And what I found is men get more done when they're in the group. Like, they actually start to take more action in the world. There's kind of a paradox of when we feel safe, we can take more risk. And when we're severely isolated, oftentimes our nervous system is not feeling safe. And so it's harder oftentimes to take the bigger risks. So you do need, a little bit, but again, being in a group, it actually fuels it even more. Like, it's incredible.
I know this is a really big, I don't want to say an archetype. Like I said, I see this a lot in Stoic practices. Uh, being with men does not come naturally to some men. Now, I want to say that out loud because I want our audience to hear this. If this is something you have to work at to be around other men, you're not broken. Nothing is wrong with you. It does not inherently come to people, right? For some of us, it's just not a natural instinct. Now, I say that because I do think men should be in communion with other men. Uh, I did not used to think that. I had very much of a lone wolf personality for a very long time. The men in my circle have always been a very, very small, select group of guys, and it's one or two. It's never been, I've never gotten along with men otherwise. Like, I've never
Mhm.
been a guy who got along with other guys. And so this idea is something I've had to actually adjust to in the last couple of years of my life. And I have to work at it. It does not come instinctively for me, gentlemen. It's not something that's actually very comfortable for me still. If you guys follow me on social media, I posted a picture Saturday from I was at a big men's Bible study I go to every month, and there's like 30 guys there. And yeah, for me, that's a stretch. I have social anxiety issues anyways, but that big of a group, I'm having to learn to try and be a part. And they're all very high value men. I think the world of those guys. But if you're not instinctually part of this, right? If this doesn't come naturally, please understand it doesn't mean that you don't need it. It also does not mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means you may have to work at it a little bit more. Now, I have been really surprised the last couple of years because we've seen this come up in media for the first time in like the movies. I thought you would appreciate this as a fellow movie guy. Are you a Kipling fan?
Kipling,
The
the actor?
the Jungle Book, Rudyard.
Oh gosh, a little bit, yeah.
So they did the live action one. Disney's been doing the live action stuff.
That's right.
One of the things they talked about was the law of the jungle and the pack where we recite that the wolf on his own will die
Mhm.
because the strength of the wolf is the pack and the strength of the pack is the wolf. Right. And it's,
That's right, yeah.
if you guys are watching on the video, I've got it scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I threw that in there in case you've just never seen the Jungle Book. And if you've just never seen the live action Jungle Book, I know Disney has not hit their batting average on the live action movies has not been great, but that one was actually pretty cute. As a lifelong, I grew up. The Jungle Book was one of my favorite movies growing
Yeah.
up. It's one of the first books I ever read, like just actually read the book. Um, and so I had to see it when it came out. Seeing Scarlett Johansson sing the song for the snake, "Be Call" was amazing.
That was, yeah.
But I was really like they recite this, the law of the jungle, multiple times in the movie. And it was one of the first times I really noted is like, oh wow, this is the first time I'm really hearing them say it in a movie.
Mhm.
The lone wolf is a bad thing. Right. And I mean, obviously he's not the focus of the movie, but as somebody who works in the men's space, my brain went, wait, they said it out loud. Right. How
Yeah, take note.
And then it was actually in A Song of Ice and Fire, in the TV adaptation. Sansa Stark says, "When the snow falls, the wind blows, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." Game of Thrones got a lot of attention. I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones fan,
For sure.
but when they said that, right, this was a saying for the Stark household, which is one of the households in the Game of Thrones. It's like, okay, wow, we're starting to see this actually gain some traction where we're talking about men need to connect, right? Now, obviously, it was two girls having that conversation in Game of Thrones, but the concept is breaking this lone wolf concept. And it was nice to see that because when you finally start to see something in the media,
Totally.
which is usually not your best friend, it's like, okay. So there's enough people starting to have this thought
Hmm.
for the media to reflect it. Now, let me be clear on that. Not everything the media reflects is popular thought, because the media is really bad about engineering what they want you to think. But for it to actually show up in a show is like, oh, okay. I don't understand. One of the things that's always baffled me, because I was that kid who grew up on the Rambo movies, the John Wayne movies, right? The lone wolf action heroes. Didn't Chuck Norris actually do one called Lone Wolf?
I wouldn't be surprised. That's a
I'm
yeah.
pretty sure. I grew up on all those movies. My dad was a 80s action junkie, right?
Ditto.
Which was funny because he was a preacher. So it kind of up. Um, I'm trying to think back, right, with some hindsight at 44 years old, of what the appeal was. Now that I've started to try and purposely have men in my life and have groups of men that I associate with and interact with, I'm looking back in hindsight, trying to figure out what the appeal was. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's just kind of woven into the American myth and ethos, right? This kind of indestructible man who doesn't need anyone and can just survive on his own. And I can go pretty deep on that. Like for me, I think there's some pretty big shadow in that, because when you set that up to be the paradigm, right? That even this phrase, we pick ourselves up from the bootstraps, right? That a man should be able to figure it out and lead his life and all of that by himself. Um, what that does is it shifts really all of the responsibility to the individual. And it means that if your life doesn't work out right or something goes wrong, it's your fault. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't take care of yourself enough. Um, you didn't have high enough character. And while all those things are important, it creates a pretty big shadow in the society, in my opinion, that, yeah, you're on your own. And if you can't handle that, it's your problem, right? So if you lose a job, it's your fault. If you get sick, it's your fault. It's not anyone else's fault. And we want harmony and balance with all these things, but it's pretty woven in. It's pretty woven into the so much of America, right? This idea that um, yeah, you can just do it all by yourself. And the truth is, nobody has ever lived that way sustainably on the planet. Like we can think we're independent, but we all rely on other people. We all rely on systems around us. And I think that's just one of the big shifts here. And, it's fun for, action wise, like you can create more drama, just in the idea of literally the lone cowboy having to shoot off and all that kind of stuff. But even a lot of the great old tales, right? They weren't about individuals. The Magnificent Seven, Seven Samurai, it's about the collective coming together, right? Which is far more powerful than the individual. And those stories are there. There was just, the 80s in particular were that time of um, self, 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 go, 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 you, the individual, right? You gotta work harder, work harder, work harder. And like I said, that's an important attribute to have, but it's ultimately not sustainable. And it causes a tremendous amount of suffering, in particular for men, because then when their life isn't going well, they hold it all inside and then they hold it in their bodies. And then they're not really given the tools for how to deal with that. And that actually shows up in terms of physical ailments. The older we get, men get sick when we're isolated. We get sick more easily. We die sooner. Our life satisfaction goes down. Like these things have a real impact. And when we don't know how to handle our emotional stress, let's say, what do a lot of men do? They turn to substances outside of themselves to try to make themselves feel better. If what's happening in my body and in my heart is too uncomfortable, then I need to feel something else. For some men, that's booze. For some men, that's weed. For some men, that's porn, sex, masturbation. For some men, that's food. For some, there's countless ways us men will kind of do that, because we're often not given the tools for how to be with our internal experience. In particular, we're not given a community to experience that in. And all of the most challenging, emotions and experiences in life, we're meant to feel in community, right? We're meant to grieve in community in particular. And our culture creates no space for that, right? No space for men to just be like, man, I feel heartbroken right now. And when they don't have that a space to do that, men just tighten up, keep it inside, try to trudge forward, and it catches up. It catches up with so many men in some way, shape, or form eventually. And part of what I'm here to argue is not only is it more effective to get into a group and surround yourself with community in terms of the things you want to move forward in your life, it just makes it better. Like you're going to have the same stresses in life, but being in connection makes it so much easier to be with those stresses. So kind of long-winded answer.
Nope, I like it. I like it. Let's talk isolation versus solitude for a minute,
Hmm.
because you mentioned isolation,
Yeah.
and so I'm like I said, I have to work personally to be around other men. It does actually. I'm a bit of an introvert, so there is a slight depletion when I'm around groups,
Yeah.
right? So solitude is very important to me, but I think a lot of men sometimes misunderstand the concepts of isolation versus solitude.
Yeah. That's great. Um, what I would say here is the key thing is just being around people isn't enough, right? So it's very easy, and probably many people have had the experience of you can be around people and still feel deeply alone, meaning I don't feel connected or a part of the people I'm around. And that's what, in particular, creates the most harm for us long term. That's a little different from isolation, right? Which is just sometimes I just need to take space. And a lot of men do need to take a lot of space. I'm also an introvert and definitely need my time. And I way prefer personally going like super deep with two or three men than being in a huge group. It just that's better for my nervous system. But the point is, even, for me, I can give an example of during the pandemic, right? I was already in a men's group and I just had my first kid, which tends to be an isolating time anyway. But it was pretty much a non thing for me because most of my social needs, before my kid was born, because life was just crazy, were coming through my men's group. We'd meet every other Monday. Sometimes, we'd hang out in between. And even when the pandemic came, we did some groups online for a little while, and then we moved to like backyards where we could have space. But the rhythm of the group went uninterrupted. So every 2 weeks, I was sitting down with 8 of my favorite men and going deep and talking about what was real and alive in my life. So I never felt lonely during the pandemic, right? Because I was able to go deep. I felt connected to my men, even though I was spending a lot more time isolated, other than my wife and my kid in that. And the key thing here is it's okay to take lots of space and lots of time, but you want to know there's a place, meaning some relationships, where you can bring your full self and feel connected and a part of, right? And that doesn't have to be a huge group. It can be just two, three, four people in your life that you really feel comfortable being yourself. And in particular for us men, being vulnerable with, right? Revealing what's hard in your life and where you're struggling. You can just kind of put it all on the table. A lot of times, just sharing those kinds of things already starts to shift the energy in our nervous system or our life. So there's a huge difference, right? You can be around tons of people, but still feel quite lonely. And you can also not spend a lot of time around people, but feel quite connected because the people you do spend time with, you know how to go deep with, and they see you and they feel you, and you can talk about real things. The one last thing I'll just kind of point out here is one of the challenges us men have is most of us are raised to relate to other men through triangulation, which means you and I hang out, but when we're hanging out, our attention is on a third thing, right? It's on a sports game, it's on some activity, it's on nerd culture. We're talking about something, and our connection comes from us having our attention on that third thing together, which there's a time and place for that, right? Like I love that stuff. So I'm not here to say don't do that. What I'm saying is you also have to match that with actual relation, which means when we're together, my attention is on you and your attention is on me. And we're talking about the experience of being with each other and what our lives are. And a lot of men, we've never been taught to do that. So that can make us deeply uncomfortable in our nervous systems. But that's often where the um, the greatest connection comes from, that really can then source us against the stresses of life.
Guys, we've been talking a little bit about what Jason does and the myth of the lone wolf versus the idea of being in a pack or in a community, and how that adds value to your life, why we think it's important. In the next part of the show, we're going to dive into how to start connecting with those groups. One of the things that's complicated for a lot of men is they don't really know how to plug into those groups, and they see it as this daunting thing because they see it as, oh, I've got to go jump. No, you don't have to go jump into this. So we're going to help you with that in the next part of the show. I've had to work really hard in the last couple of years. I have hit the point in my life where I realized that I need those communities and I need to be part of those communities. But it was not a natural, instinctive thing for me. So hopefully Jason can give us some insights on how connecting with other men in groups can work for us. And one of the things you mentioned briefly towards the end of the last segment was it doesn't have to be a large group. It can be 3 or 4 guys that you just deeply connect with. So let's get into this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start there. So, I've been part of a few different groups throughout my life. Um, I'm a bit of a men's group junkie, so I'm in many, but one of the longest standing for me is my local group here. I live in Los Angeles right now, and I've been with these guys since early 2014. And how that group started, case in point here, was me and 2 other men who decided, hey, we want to start meeting because we need it, right? We need some support, we need some accountability, and we want to go deeper, right? We don't want to just connect and talk about the shallow stuff, but like, yeah, what's going on? What are you experiencing? What are you wanting to move towards in your life? What's in the way? Um, those were the kind of conversations and connections we wanted to have. So the 3 of us just decided we're going to do this. We're going to start. We're going to start meeting. We picked a day and a time and we started meeting. And we were pretty committed to that. And then we expanded the invitation, right, to some other guys like, hey, here's the thing we're doing. You want to come check it out? You can sit in for a meeting or two. And if it becomes something you're interested in joining long term, we can talk about that. And it grew from there. And like I said, we ended up capping ours. I think our biggest at one point was 9, just because the space we meet in, we literally couldn't get more bodies in there. And for the rhythm of our group, that's about what's appropriate. I find the sweet spot for most men's groups in my experience is, yeah, 6 to 10 men. Beyond that, it's kind of hard to get everybody connected in one meeting if you only have a couple hours. But what I love about men's groups is they can be totally decentralized in the sense that you don't have to go find one. Even you can just start one, right? And there's ways to do that and things you can do to kind of tighten that up. And what's the framework of your group? What do you want to focus on? Often groups have a theme or something that connects them. But point being, like, any man can be the one who puts the flag in the ground with a couple of guys he feels a little just spark or connection to, of, hey, let's take this deeper. Let's take our lives deeper and let's start meeting. So that's available to anyone, anytime, any place, any man, which is a great starting point. Then there's also more organized things to get into, right? Church groups, like you spoke about, are one of the few places men's groups are still flourishing in a lot of ways, that men can go and find community. And I think that's part of what's been hard for a lot of men is, a lot of people aren't as involved as they used to be. that was one of the main areas for men to socialize and get connection and get community just beyond, their immediate vicinity. Um, there's also, you can go on to things like meetup.com or Eventbrite and, kind of search in your area. Like, are there any groups meeting already, any men's gatherings of any kind? And you can always go kind of check out one of those or audition them. There's obviously poking around online, trying to find things. There's more and more organizations coming online to support men in these ways. Mine is just one of many. Um, Probably the longest standing for a long time was one called the Mankind Project, and they really have a presence in pretty much every big city across the world now. Um, but with any of these, it, you want to find the one that works for you, and it might try taking a couple chances and sitting in on some groups and finding who do you vibe with, whose values align with you, and who do you really see yourself investing this time in. So it does take work to get out the door, but it's always worth it. Another thing I've also found tends to work well, Brent, is for guys going on retreat or going to a workshop, because once you spend some time with men, you often get connected to them. And then it's like, oh, we want to keep this going. So a lot of guys I work with, they came to one of my retreats and then they just met a couple other really cool men and they wanted to stay in touch. And then lo and behold, that kind of blossoms into their own group long term. But the idea is, you're picking a certain group of men. It can be, virtual or in person. That's the kind of amazing thing about where we're at now. You're choosing a time and a place where you're going to meet with some consistency. And in that time, we're not just talking about the surface stuff, right? We want to actually get deep and connect to our bodies, connect to what's most important in our lives right now, share about where we're struggling, and sometimes get some counsel for other men. As I like to say, one of the real powers of men's group is it's a place where we can be supported when we're feeling down and things aren't quite going how we want. But it's also that place, the flip that we were talking about a little earlier, where we can be held accountable to move the things forward we want to move that are most important to us in our life, or to be encouraged to come back into integrity if there's any places in our life where we're not, right? You keep saying you want to do this, but you're not actually doing it. Or that experience you're having in that relationship, like, man, that doesn't seem really fair to either of you. It's like, maybe it's time to change that configuration and come back into integrity somehow. Like, groups have been transformative for me in that sense of really helping me get my life more and more aligned and on track.
Now, guys, one of the things we talked about in the last part a little bit is this concept of triangulation, right? That's how men tend to connect with each other, is you and I focusing on this. And this is one of the things where we're actually going nature against nature for guys if we're not careful. So let me throw this out because this was an issue for me. You can Part of the reason we're drawn to triangulation is as communicators, we're side by side communicators, not face to face communicators. Men, it's actually in our nature to stay away from the face to face because at our most base level, that is an active conflict. Men instinctively, that's a challenge. When you come eye to eye with another man, that is an act of aggression for a lot of guys instinctively, even if you don't realize it. Down at your base core, we're talking the base systems of your personality as a man, you instinctively know that that is an act of aggression to come eye to eye with another man. A lot of times it's okay when you're shaking hands or something like that, right, and confirming, but the areas for men where that seems okay is very small, which is why we're drawn to this idea of triangulation, right? We have something to connect with. So when you're trying to meet with other groups, you can still have that outside piece and still connect, right? We're not saying you have to sit face to face, eye to eye, and have a heart to heart with other guys. You can sit around and I sat down one night with 3 other guys, and we smoked cigars and had a drink on a patio at a cigar bar, and we talked, and we had deep, meaningful, connective conversations in a very non-confrontational way because we were doing something together. This allowed us to have that third piece where we're not having to stare at each other and just feel awkward, which for some of us is very some guys can do it. And I'm all for the guys who can do that. Some of us, that's a very awkward feeling. And so without having that thing to distract you, right? Don't watch a football game and think you're going to connect if you're focused on the football game. But you can add doing something together, right? Guys can fish together, you can walk together. That's why guys talk better in the car to other people than they do
Mhm.
in person side face to face a lot of times. So there are ways to get around this awkwardness that some of you might feel.
Yeah, it's a real thing, and it, you can practice. Like I do a lot of work with men in person, and it is pretty challenging for some men just to make eye contact with other guys. They just right, they look away, they're feeling comfortable, they laugh, but it's a capacity we can learn to develop. Because even underneath being men, we're all humans first and foremost, and we're actually wired for that connection, right? There's a huge bundle of nerves that goes down our center channel from our spine to the base. That's called the vagal nerve, and that nerve is wired to be receptive to to face eye contact. And speech is actually one of the primary ways we can co-regulate each other as human beings. So just you and I making eye contact, seeing each other's face, taking a breath, um, certain tones of vocalization in particular, like lo and behold, it turns out that folk music, there's a reason people have been singing it for a long time because that tone is very soothing to our vagal nerve. Point being, co-regulation is when we do connect in that way, it actually is what sends the signals to our body to move out of fight or flight into rest and digest, to relax. And so many of us are overstressed and in this constant activated hyper aroused state now that this type of connection is one way to do it. And when I say that, it's not like we're spending 12 hours a day doing that. Sometimes just 2 minutes can completely change your nervous system. And, it's important for men in partnership as well. You're having a fight with your spouse, we want to eject. That's actually the time you need to co-regulate each other. Um, but that you're right. The other thing to share here is, in some sense, the oldest men's circle there is sitting around a fire, right? There's a locust for our attention, and then we're able to speak into it. And for a lot of men, they actually find that more freeing because it's, oh, I can share my deepest challenges to the fire. It's not quite as vulnerable as sharing it directly to another man, even though he's right there. And that works, right? So just as important as the face to face, the idea is, even more than it physically being face to face, the object of our attention is each other, right? It might be framed around something else, a fire or smoking cigars, but the point of why we're here is actually to connect, is to bring more depth to our interactions. And like you said, you can link that around hiking, sports, hunting, fishing. There's lots of ways to do it where you can take the interactions you're having and start to bring them to this deeper level without it even having to explicitly be a men's group of the type that I tend to lead. There's ways you can bring this connectivity into your existing relationships and improve them and really get to know each other at a deeper way. Sometimes I'll work with guys who have been struggling around this for a long time, and they come to some of my groups, and then they're the ones that open the door for some of their existing friendships where it's like, yeah, I talked with my brother-in-law in a way I've never talked to him for 25 years, and now I know things about him I never knew before. And we had spent you know years together, but we had never really taken that time to drop in with each other. And that's the kind of thing that becomes possible when we learn some of these tools and we consciously start to step into these types of connections.
So, guys, I threw in my 2 cents on that just before you guys who are wading into this. If this idea seems scary, it's approachable. You need other men around you. You need other solid, strong men of character around you to help you become your best self. I thoroughly believe that at this point in my life. And I don't know if that's the right word. I completely believe that at this point in my life. But I know for some of us, it can be a little bit intimidating to move to this. So we're not asking you to jump into a deep, heart to heart, face to face conversation with a bunch of other men right off the bat. There are ways to wade into this to ease yourself in and get more comfortable with this idea of deeply connecting with other men and other groups. You can start around a campfire because Jason's right. We all love campfires, right? My fire pit, I have a fire pit in my backyard. It's one of my favorite things in the world. So you can start around the campfire. Okay. You can start around some cigars or watching your kids play sports together. I talk to dads all the time when my daughters are playing basketball. So you can start in a number of ways to add groups into your life of men. And then you can take that further as you progress, as you get more comfortable. But you need to find solid men to have in your life. Now, Jason, if this is really connecting with guys, right? If this is resonating with our listeners today, what are the first 3 steps you'd recommend for guys to start implementing this in their life?
Yeah, like I said, I would recommend call together some men, right? Just think of 2, 3 other men in your life who you just have a sense like, I think I could go deeper with them, or they might be open to connecting in this different way. And then just say, hey, I want to get together, and I want to get together, and I want us to talk about our lives, right? Just that simple. And you give it a whirl, just 90 minutes, on a Saturday night or something like that. So just connect with the men who are already present in your life. That could be step number one at a deeper level. Step number two is if you want to, increase your capacity for that or learn some tools or have some experiences. Like I said, it would be go out and try to form or to find a already established group of some kind where you can drop in and participate and probably experience some new ways of connecting that you've never done before. And then, step three would be, yeah, really go for the whole enchilada and like go on retreat or something sometime where, I've seen the deepest bonding with men come when men tend to bond when we do hard things and we do vulnerable things. And I have just seen, the level of connectivity that certain men can form, even in just a weekend, then creates the bedrock for the rest of their lives together in pretty powerful ways. It happened for me, and it's now why I try to create those experiences for other men too. And there's lots of them out there. The good news is, like you said, this stuff is starting to bubble up through the culture because there's a real need. So there's more and more attention and more work out there about, yeah, men, you do not have to suffer alone, right? So reach out to some guys around you, find a group that already exists around you, or go on the big epic quest and go on retreat somewhere.
What's next for Jason Lange?
I'm good. Just keep doing what I do, man. Yeah, being a father, being a husband, and just supporting men to realize that, hey, like I just said, you don't have to suffer alone. And what I have found is the power of groups and community like this. It doesn't make life easier, but it does make it better. Just makes it a lot better. The stresses of life keep coming at you, but what a good group can do is resource you against those stresses in a way that just isn't possible alone.
Now, we've got your website up, and guys, that will be in the show notes. Jason, or do you do social media? Where's the best place for people just to connect to you? Is it here at the website or somewhere else?
Yeah, I'd say here at the website you can check out my podcast. I do a little bit of Instagram, but I don't have a huge social media presence. Podcasting is really what I love, just having conversations like this and being able to go. So that's probably the best way to check out the deeper vibes of some of what I'm up to as well. It's right here on my site.
Now, I know that everybody is really worried about what Bruno Mars's real name is.
Yeah, I am curious.
And you guessed D, Bruno Marza, or whatever it is that I can't pronounce. Bruno Mars's real name is actually A, Peter Gene Hernandez.
Wow, never would have guessed that.
Your world is radically changed, right?
It totally is,
I
actually.
know that you totally deeply cared about that like everybody else. Guys, my wife showed me this meme the other day on Instagram that just and it was a picture of a bunch of men standing around a barbecue grill, all with a beer in their hand. And it actually had a caption that said, only men can spend an hour and a half like this and not even know each other's first name. And I want to say that that's super funny because there's truth to it. Okay. Don't be that guy. That's what we're saying today. Don't be that guy. You need to connect with healthy men to be the best version of yourself. And Jason has laid out that argument very well for us today. Jason, as we land this plane, wrap us out. If someone heard nothing else today, what is the most important thing you want them to hear?
Every man should be in a men's group. You will be creating the conditions for your life to thrive at an entirely next level.
Guys, for myself and Jason, thanks for hanging out with us today. As always, be better tomorrow because of what you do today, and we'll see you on the next one.
This has been the Fallible Man Podcast, your home for everything man, husband, and father. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a show. Head over to www.thefallibleman.com for more content and get your own Fallible Man gear.